I'm Edna Hunneysett and I have 6 books published. I'm a great-grandmother now, 82 years old, and these are my first books. They're about mental health and raising awareness, a very topical subject these days. One of our children was seriously ill in her teens and we wrote our story about what we went through. The second 3 books are entirely different. They're about farming in the 40s and boarding school life in the 50s, and then when I went out into the big wide world and met Mr. Right. And the one I'm going to talk about tonight is the first one, Greener Beyond the Hill. Why I wrote this book, and I wrote it many years ago in longhand. We didn't have computers then or emails, anything like that, because when I was pregnant with my 8th child, my father died of cancer and I was 8.5 months pregnant. And my youngest child, she was upset as she grew up, getting to primary school and finding that she did not know her granddad, and the other 7 siblings had all talked about him. So I thought I would write about him to let her know what he was like. And I wrote longhand and started off when they were going to move to the small farm where we were brought up. And the little girl, the 3rd one in the book, is Edna. But it is a semi-autobiographical one now, as I will explain to you as I go along. I first wrote it very emotionally about my father, and I tried many times to get it published, and I didn't manage to do that, and then I left it. And many years later, when my youngest daughter recovered from her illness, we revamped it and we brought in mystery and we changed things around and took characters out, and I still didn't get it published. And then after my 3 mental health ones, I changed it again and I changed the end of the book, and then I finally got it published, and I'm going to read you the first few pages of it. Mary, the name I gave my mum, she wasn't called Mary, and Tom. At last, Mary thought, today is the day. It is almost the end of October, and the sale of Mr. and Mrs. Morehouse's miscellaneous pieces of farm equipment, household goods, and any remaining livestock was finally to take place, as the elderly couple were retiring. Mary could hardly wait for them to leave. Then they will go and the house will be ours, she thought happily. Mary stretched her arm across the mattress to see if Tom, her husband, was there, but just as she'd expected, he'd crept out much earlier to help Mr. Morehouse sort out lots for the sale in the farmyard. It had been her intention to stay with their children on the neighbouring farm of Tom's cousin, Charlie, at his wife Dorothy's suggestion, until the Morehouses left Bankside Farm. Tom was very keen to move back to North before the Morehouses left, because he wanted to be at the sale to join in the bidding, if his slender means allowed, for anything he deemed essential for his future work on this rented farm. A late letter from Dorothy scuppered Mary's plans. Dorothy's children were ill with whooping cough. As Mary did not want her children to be unnecessarily in contact with such a distressing ailment, her only alternative was a request to stay with the Morehouses for a few days, to which they kindly agreed. Tom would be with her in the evenings, but he was to spend each day at Prospect Farm helping Charlie. She had been dreading this beginning at Bankside Farm, and the Morehouses' removal day seemed a long time in coming. But it's here, thought Mary, brightening up at the thought. We can bring out in our own pieces of furniture from the outbuilding where we stored them when we came. It will be just us and our little ones. Mary and Tom arrived at Bankside Farm in a removal van some days ago with their 3 small children, and in the back of the van, alongside their scant possessions, a small assortment of livestock. Mary remembered ruefully the reason why they have so little furniture. They sold the best of it to raise cash to put towards buying the horse and later a cow. Mary was very fond of their first married possessions, chosen together, and now they were gone. Tom, her husband, explained that farm work could be done with borrowed implements, but livestock needed to be bought, such as a horse to pull the plough, the chain harrows, the grass cutter and the like, and a cow to provide milk and calves. Some of these words were strange to a town girl like Mary, who knew nothing about farming. She felt sad to think of her personal possessions being replaced by animals, but was looking forward to the future, envisaging the pleasure of buying for their new home. When they finally decided to move back up north to a farm from their small rented cottage, she imagined a large farmhouse kitchen with an oak dresser, an oblong table and chairs, and plenty of storage cupboards. Mary allowed herself to indulge in these fanciful thoughts, with no conception of the reality that lay ahead, as her knowledge of farmhouse kitchens was virtually nil. Her dreams were shattered after discovering the reality of the situation over the last days. Never mind, I'll see Tom more often, she thought, consoling herself. He'll be popping in and out during the day for frequent mugs of tea and 5-minute chats in between the farm work, instead of going off to work early and returning late. With these thoughts, Mary snuggled down under the covers for a few more minutes before embarking on the busy day ahead. Black curls lay over Mary's forehead, and under her deep-set brown eyes, overshadowed by thick black lashes, dark shadows were visible. She was almost 27 years old, a normally slim and energetic young woman, but the last few days had taken their toll on her in coping with Emma, 27 months, Martha, aged 3, and 4-year-old Tim. In the early stages of pregnancy again, Mary felt very nauseous and listless. She closed her eyes and let her mind wander back to the halcyon days of courtship, being held in Tom's strong arms, dancing the hours away in the village halls around Whitby town. Her father, originally from the Scottish border, was transferred to the small seaside town in Yorkshire in his work as an office clerk. He was happy to move with his younger daughter, leaving behind his elder one already in employment, as he was very unsettled since the death of his wife some years previously. Mary was a clever girl, but having reached her 14th birthday on moving, did not return to school. She found employment working in a sweet shop. In time, her father took over a small local public house in one of the villages on the outskirts of Whitby, giving Mary further employment, helping behind the bar on weekend evenings, which is when Tom entered her life. She recalled her first memory of him, tall and lean with dark straight hair combed back, and so handsome, she thought, as he walked into the pub with his mates. His face was alight and his hazel-coloured eyes twinkled. The first time he spoke to her, she felt her heart fluttering. She was painfully shy and unsure how to deal with his obvious interest. Each time in those early months, whenever he appeared at the pub, her heart turned over as she sensed him approaching the bar. Was it deliberately planned that he seemed to frequent the pub when she was on duty? She returned home romanticising her knight in shining armour. Mary stirred, feeling slightly more relaxed and content after reminiscing over this tall, dark stranger whom she eventually married. She knew he wanted to have his own farm one day. She learned that Tom, having left school at 14 years of age, equipped only with his common sense and a good grounding in farming, was determined to succeed and earn a living. He met many country lasses, but once seen Mary was captivated by this vivacious, curly-haired brunette. He found her appealingly curvaceous. The moment he set eyes on her pulling pints behind the bar, he decided that she was the one for him. Tom oozed charm, unlike Charlie, his cousin and drinking partner, who, although the better dancer of the two, was a little dour. It was Tom who caught the lasses when he had a mind to. Tom worshipped, wooed and won his Mary. All of this delighted her. Mary opened her eyes. She needed to drag herself out of the warm blankets on the makeshift bed. Tom warned her that plenty of folks would be turning up for the sale. "It will be mugs of tea all round," he said jokingly. Mary hoped not. They had scarcely any mugs or cups, and Mrs. Morehouse's pots and pans were already packed for their move out. She glanced over to her children, still soundly sleeping. It was so early. Mary was feeling nauseous again. It seemed to come in waves. When would this wretched sickness ease off, she questioned herself. She curled up a little longer, reliving their first encounter with Mr. and Mrs. Morehouse after that long journey. And what a journey that was, she mused. Whilst wondering what she had let herself in for, Mary began dozing. She floated back to the events that started with that letter she received from Dorothy, Charlie's wife. She met Charlie, Tom's cousin, when courting. Charlie was dark-haired, tall and lean like Tom, but not quite so handsome, in Mary's opinion. He'd married a quiet, mousy-haired girl from the village near to his birthplace. Dorothy was a sensible choice, Tom's sister Gertie declared. "She'll make a good hard-working farmer's wife, I reckon," she said to Charlie. "Unlike our Tom's lass, what's she called? Mary, that's it." "Aye, I warned him," responded Charlie, scowling somewhat with his beetle brows lowered. "I told him she'd be no good for a farmer's wife, a slip of a thing like that from town, and you know what he retorted? 'If I burns me backside, I'll sit on blisters.' He wouldn't be told." Charlie grunted a note of pessimism. Tom's sister, Gertie, was equally unflattering in her judgment of Mary. "That flighty bit from town," was how she described her. Gertie, dominant and forthright, broad and buxom, helped to raise Tom after their mother died while he was still at school. With their father's help, she'd become responsible for working the family's rented farm, which was remotely situated in a valley alongside a tributary of the River Esk, outside Shepton, a village on the Yorkshire moors. Over the years, she'd kept a motherly eye on her brother's activities, and "them from towns were no good for country folk," she'd stated adamantly. Tom followed his heart in defiance of these comments. After they married, Mary and Tom left Tom's native Yorkshire to go south for work. Rose Cottage was the accommodation offered along with his job. It was one of 4 terraced cottages situated up a small lane near an outlying hamlet some miles from Stratford-on-Avon. Mary imagined a quaint country cottage with straggling ivy and bedecked with rose bushes, a little wicket gate and stone pathway leading to a rustic wooden door with a delicately coloured and warm interior, and nothing could have been further from the truth. It was devastating having her fantasies blown away, but she tried to see the positive and thought that maybe she could improve on the gloomy decor and somehow block out the drafts from the windows. Possibly she could make a little pathway by cleaning the old broken stones covered in weeds and moss. And somehow that never happened, as babies quickly arrived on the scene and totally occupied her time. Mary struggled over the years, especially after the birth of Emma, with endless nappies to wash, many broken nights and tiring days. There were no relatives around to visit or ask help from. The only respite came when Betty arrived. The War Ministry was asking for lodgings for young women who were willing to work on farms, replacing many of the labourers who signed up to join the forces. This young lady arrived after Tom and Mary agreed they could take in one lodger by putting Tim in the tiny box room, provided the land girl was happy to share Martha's bed in her small bedroom. Emma was feeding at night time and slept in her cot close by with Mary and Tom. Betty was a delight, a down-to-earth, chubby girl with masses of ginger hair tied in a bushy ponytail. She was constantly singing the latest pop tune and was a massive help to Mary over the next few months when she wasn't working. Betty worked irregular hours, but never having been on a farm or lived in the countryside, she found the whole experience an adventure, and it was a sad day for the Holmes family when she moved on. Betty was greatly missed, especially by Mary, whose spirits flagged after the land girl went. Night after night, Tom returned home to a very tired wife and chores waiting to be done, as Mary found herself unable to cope. Gone were all her plans for renovating the cottage. Just surviving each day was a feat. Soon the dreadful stage of baby crawling became a reality. Emma was a source of constant anxiety to Mary. She explored the nooks and crannies in the cottage, finding spiders curled up in corners or mice droppings in the scullery. Woe betide if Mary left the door open, as Emma immediately made a beeline for the open space, engineering herself over the step and heading off down the field. On one of these occasions, Tom, returning home earlier than usual, found her sitting among the grass. He was perturbed at finding Emma so far from the cottage, but pushed it to the back of his mind, not wanting to criticise Mary and add to her distress. It was the letter from Charlie and Dorothy that changed things. Charlie's affection for Tom, his cousin, was akin to a brother's. He knew Tom would love to come back to Yorkshire and that prospects would be better for him farming his own land than continuing working as a labourer. Charlie was keeping his ears to the ground regarding available rented farmland. He persuaded his young wife to write periodically to Mary and Tom with any news, even though Dorothy struggled to make time for such an occupation, because as well as helping on the farm, she was preoccupied looking after their young children. They were renting a small holding Crossbeck farm in the hamlet of Moorbeck on the Yorkshire moors, and it kept them busy every minute of each day. Moorbeck was situated in a small valley, tucked away on the moors above Whitby, with a tributary of the River Esk running through it. Although picturesque in summer, it was bleak and desolate in winter. It contained two small holdings, Bankside Farm, occupied by an elderly couple, the Moorhouses, due for retirement, and Charlie Holmes' place, Crossbeck Farm, situated on the far side of the valley. Both properties were part of a large estate, and all business was dealt with through an agent employed by the owner. Once a year, all tenants were invited to a dinner and to pay their annual rents. At the last gathering, Charlie got wind of the Moorhouses' intentions to retire and put in a good word to the agent about Tom being a local lad, an excellent worker, and was available and looking to rent his own farm. And from that time, Mr. Moorhouse regularly updated Charlie on the progress being made. Around the time of Emma's second birthday, Charlie learned that the Moorhouses had finally decided on a retirement date and that their rented farm, Bankside, run down and dilapidated, was up for re-rental. On Charlie's instruction, correspondence increased between Dorothy and Mary and Tom, about the chances of Tom taking over Bankside Farm. It seems a good idea, Tom thought, thinking about a move to Bankside Farm. He was sitting by the fire late one evening with Mary already in bed, tired out from her busy day with their 3 lively offspring. He poked the fire to resurrect a flame from the dying embers and pulled his cigarettes from his jacket pocket. Taking a spill from the newly acquired spill holder on the mantelpiece, he poked it in the flame and when lit, held it to his cigarette. He drew in deeply. Can't beat a good little woodbine, he thought. Tom knew his present farm labourer's wage could not possibly achieve what he desired for their children. He wanted to work his own farm instead of labouring, and always held the desire and hope of being back among his own solid Yorkshire mates. This seemed an ideal opportunity. Charlie would be nearby to give advice and share farm implements until such a time as Tom could afford his own, and Tom would be only a few miles from his dad's place. Tom sighed. He was tired. Makes sense to me, he reasoned. I'll ask Mrs. in the morning about it. With that, he threw his tab end into the dying embers, swilled his face at the kitchen sink, and paddled quietly upstairs to bed. What do you think, lass? Tom asked Mary over breakfast, drinking tea from his pint mug, while Mary was struggling to put Emma into the old worn and scratched wooden high chair about third hand when they'd been given it. Emma persisted in scurrying to every corner of the room each time Mary made a grab at her. Martha and Tim were already seated on their chairs for their breakfast. Mary finally cornered her mischievous daughter, fastening the leather strap around Emma and the chair to make her secure, before replying. I'll talk later, Tom. I just can't listen with these 3 around. Have a chat with Mr. Snaith. He'll understand your reasons and give you good advice. Mr. Snaith was Tom's boss, a robust and genial sort of fellow whom Mary always found to be pleasant and courteous. You don't mind us going then? I think we ought to if it means more money for us. Mary burst into tears. She was not feeling well. What's up, lass? Don't cry, Tom said soothingly as he put his arm round his wife. She blinked back tears through her thick lashes. Don't you want to go? It's not that. I guess we're having another one and I don't know how we'll manage and if we stay here. If renting our own spot means more money, more space, then we'd better go, she replied, with little sobs in between short breaths. Tom gave his wife a hug, kissing her on the cheek. Well, I guess there's much the way you've been these last couple of days. Don't worry, lass, we'll manage fine. It will be good move. After further reassuring words, Tom, taking his frayed working jacket from the nail behind the door, made his way out, leaving Mary smiling and a little more able to face the day. Tom went to work, determined to discuss matters with his boss and see what advice he could offer. Following a chat and with words of encouragement from Colin Snaith, Tom set the wheels in motion for a move to Bankside Farm, communicating through the agent with a letter dictated by Tom and written by Mary. The good news arrived within days. The information from Dorothy's latest letter was that Moorhouse's farm sale of stock and machinery was imminent. Soon Mary was packing their belongings into boxes, but found this to be something of a nightmare. No, Emma, no, was her constant cry. Emma found packing pots, jugs, jars and such like fascinating, and as soon as Mary turned her back, Emma was pulling up the paper and unravelling packages neatly stacked in readiness. One afternoon, amid all this activity, Emma made her way to the steep stairs, sat at the top step, and waved her tiny hand to the horrified faces below. "Isn't she clever, Mammy?" shouted Martha. Mary was unimpressed. She was already on edge as she tried to keep on top of the washing, while struggling to pack clothes and belongings, and yet keeping enough for the day's use. "What are you eating, Emma?" she screamed, having dashed upstairs to rescue her daughter. She forced 2 fingers into Emma's clamped-up mouth and hooked out broken eggshell. "And where have you got that from?" she questioned, not expecting an answer. Only yesterday, Emma had upturned a bowl of eggs, leaving some half broken with their contents spilt, and others with small cracks in and leaking slightly. Others rolled around in the slimy mess like footballs on a muddy wet field. "Emma is naughty," Martha said. "Tim," shrieked Mary as she brought Emma down from her high perch, "come and watch her and don't let her go up again." "Are we really going in a big van?" asked Tim, as he struggled with his little sister to deter her from climbing the stairs. "Yes, but please, for now, be good and quiet and watch the girls while Mammy packs," pleaded Mary, wiping her furrowed brow with dirty fingers. Black print from the newspapers, salvaged by Tom from his boss for use in packing, was staining her hands, and now her face was streaked too. "When will Tom come home?" she questioned herself in desperation. "Doesn't he know I can't manage all this on my own? Do the children really have all these toys?" It seemed to Mary to be an endless assortment of bricks, balls, dolls, teddies, tiny cars, books and crayons. They were mostly homemade or second-hand. Tom roughly carved out toy pull-alongs, and Mary was a neat hand at sewing old material into teddies and dollies, and stuffing them with even older material. Tim, Martha and Emma, now aged 4, 3 and 2, had no intention of parting with their treasures. "I want," started Martha as she danced from one foot to the other, and Mary could see that an urgent visit was needed across the yard to the earth closet. She dragged Martha by the hand across the cobbles and swung her through the cracked wooden door with its peeling paint. Down with her knickers and up onto the wooden board, and just in time. She clung to Mary's hands as the seat was high from the ground for a little lass. "Done, Mammy," she gleefully shouted, proud that she had prompted herself from the potty to the big seat. Everything accomplished, they made their way back to the kitchen, to be met with cries from Emma. 2 little arms stretched up to Mary, with a face running with tears turned upwards. "Whatever's the matter, darling?" cooed Mary, hugging to herself a sobbing Emma. "Tim," Mary shouted. "Tim, what did you do?" Tim hung his head. "It was a game, but Emma can't push as hard as me." "Will it never end?" thought Mary. "Does it never stop? Always noise and chatter and shouts and tears." To her relief, Tom strode in through the open door. She fell into his arms, but barely had she started her tale of woe than they heard screams from Emma. Tim decided to pretend his baby sister was a great moving toy, and having grabbed her tiny feet to delay her creeping, was sitting on her back gleefully shouting, "Gee up, gee up, gee up." Martha, meanwhile, was giving encouraging swipes at Emma's rear. "Tim, get off, you're too heavy for her," shouted Tom angrily, taking a swipe at Tim, but missing, as Tim immediately dismounted with great speed. Rescue came in the form of 2 strong hands that whisked Emma up into the air. She clung to her daddy. Her tears subsided, and tranquility once more descended on the Holmes family. but for how long? That night, Mary lay in bed worrying. She was so weary but could not sleep. She tossed and turned. She was originally unconcerned about moving, but now she was anxious. What would the journey to Yorkshire be like? She wondered. Would they manage when they got there? Tom would be working long hours, she knew that now. Would she make a good farmer's wife? Would it be very lonely with no neighbours next door? Eventually, Mary drifted into an uneasy sleep. And if you'd like to know what happened to Mary and Tom after they moved up north, will it be greener beyond the hill? These books are available at the bookshop, 6 West Row, Stockton-on-Tees, TS 18 1BT, or you can get them on the website www.thebookdragon.co.uk. Thank you.